So thank you, everyone, for coming. Welcome. Welcome and thank you for spending part of your day with us when you could be resting or even in these days participating in a political action. I'm Jessie, Myszka, and I'm moderating this panel called Beyond ESOP. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, where we would have been physically for the in-person conference, if that were possible. The benefit of only having a 60-minute session is that I'm going to make these introductions super short so that we can get right to the four panelists. I think I actually will. This is the agenda is we'll do introductions, the panelists, and then we'll have the Q&A, in particular focusing around how you see these activities and stories connecting to your work or to each other. So first, actually, some Zoom protocols. So it's up to you to choose the gallery view or the speaker view. Even as host, I can't control that, so you can do that. And then also, oh, I'm sorry. This session is being recorded. Hold that thought. Where did it go? I'm seeing pause and stop, but not the start.
Actually being recorded.
Yeah, you're being recorded. You're on. You're live.
Perfect. They said I might have to do that. But in any case, I have been asked to remind you that your comments are on the record and that there may be journalists present. So if there is something that you want to say off the record, then just preface it with that. So basically, ever since I was asked to put together a panel, it was my goal to find the edges of your familiarity with worker ownership and take you beyond to some real life examples that might not even seem plausible to some of you. And I myself have been a worker owner at Equal Exchange, which is a fair trade food company, for more than 20 years. I've worked in both sales and operations, and like Dan, who you'll meet in a second, I have served on our board of directors. In order of speaking, we have Shevanthi Daniel is Senior Director of Programs at the Democracy at Work Institute, an organization that I had the privilege of being one of the readers on its first major grant about 7 years ago. Shev brings together municipalities, business advisors, and funders with dual goals of increasing employee ownership and equity, which is ever more important. And then I invited her on this panel specifically because of her background in labor organizing with SEIU 1199 Northwest, also West Coast.
Yay!
Dan Fireside has served as the capital coordinator at Equal Exchange for more than 10 years. And so thus, for full transparency, is my coworker and my co-owner, along with about 120 other owners. As he will explain, he helps investors give us their money in return for a reasonable return, but essentially no control over our business. One of those investors is in the attendees. Dan speaks frequently at business schools and conferences, and he advises other mission-oriented companies on how to adopt Equal Exchange's capital model. Steve Sleigh has been involved with ERA for many years, and he spent at least that long working for unions directing strategy and research at the international level. And since serving as fund director for IAM's pension, savings, and health plans, he has been working as an independent advisor on how to better align the interests of workers, businesses, and investors. Today, he'll talk to us about why he believes there are many options beyond ESOPs. And finally, Natalie Reitman-White was a vice president at Organically grown company when she led it through a transition from an ESOP to a purpose trust. OGC moves literally tons of organic produce from regional farmers to local grocery stores and restaurants here in the Pacific Northwest. I was honored to attend the stakeholder gathering of the trust last fall and represent Equal Exchange in becoming an ally in the new governance system. So I can't wait to hear her explain to you exactly how no one owns the company. So I've been waiting months to hear these four leaders all together, so let's just get started. I'll mute and Shev will start us off.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. I'm excited to be on this panel with my colleagues and to also dig into how this work impacts your role in the work that you all do. So a little bit about the Democracy at Work Institute, if you're unfamiliar. We're a national nonprofit. We grew out of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives as a public benefit nonprofit for education, research, and innovation. The Federation of Worker Cooperatives was formed in 2004 as a member benefit nonprofit, and we're all together, we're part of a national organizing effort in the US to affiliate worker co-ops. So in my section, I will focus on worker cooperative businesses and their distinct differences from other types of cooperative models. And it sounds like several of you might already be pretty familiar, so I'll it'll be like a 101 version of what a cooperative is and the various forms. And then I'll go into the growing interest of municipal support, in particular city economic development departments that are interested in worker cooperatives as a means to building wealth and locally rooting businesses in the community. Generally understood, a cooperative is a business owned and operated by its members. So let's look at the three most common types of cooperatives that you all might be familiar with. So all cooperatives are made up of members, regardless of the form that it takes. In fact, cooperatives aggregate or collect all economic activity of their members, and the type of activity and the type of member really determine the cooperative structure, right? So for example, in a consumer co-op, you see the graphic to your left there. Members are buying something from the cooperative. In this case of credit unions or food co-ops, members are buying groceries or banking services. And in exchange, they are receiving those services and they're putting money into the cooperative. In a producer cooperative, which is some of the largest co-ops in the country, members are selling their product to the co-op in order to access greater markets and or have more power to negotiate prices. So in the case of farmers, they are selling their vegetables or milk under the brand of their cooperative, and members are buying products or bringing products to the co-op in exchange for money for that produce. In the worker cooperative, members are selling their labor. So this is the distinction that I just want to call out, and then we'll sort of dive a little bit deeper into worker cooperatives. But in a worker cooperative, workers are putting in their labor in return for earnings, wages plus the added benefit of profit sharing. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the worker cooperative model and what makes this a particularly distinct framework. I think you can break this down into three different characteristics that define worker cooperatives. Workers make a financial investment in the company, and everyone invests about the same amount. The co-op decides on what that amount is, and all workers have skin in the game. The second key component is that decisions are made on a one member, one vote basis, especially large decisions like starting a new line of business or bringing on new owners or selling the business. And the key thing to remember here is that despite whether a member has been there for several years or just recently joined the cooperative, all members have one vote and an equal voice. Lastly, worker co-ops are defined by their structure, and the structure of a worker cooperative can be organized in a variety of ways. Many people think of worker cooperatives being horizontally structured, where everyone has a voice and are participating in the decisions of the cooperative. That's not always the case. Worker cooperatives can be structured in multiple ways. And as long as workers have a share in the profits, have access to financial information, and a voice and a vote in major decisions, those are the core elements of how a worker cooperative is structured. So in terms of why members would choose a cooperative, we've seen a varying degree of types of co-ops that have begun to grow. So you see first-time entrepreneurs entering into the space. In this current generation of cooperatives, it's sort of moved from the niche examples that we might have had 20, 30 years ago into a place where people are really trying to create their own equitable workplaces, right? So we see gig economy workers, first-time entrepreneurs, value-based businesses, and labor-intensive businesses. But in all of these examples of why members choose a worker co-op structure, you see a pattern. There is a common understanding that there is a sharing of financial risk and the reward. Workers are looking for just and secure jobs. They want real control over their labor and the fruits of that labor. And all of these companies are motivated by more than just profit. And so it's a form that is, as equity and as sustainability becomes much more of an important component of how our society organizes itself, worker cooperatives are being seen as a means to addressing some of the economic challenges and impacts, negative impacts that traditional corporations are having out there. So let's talk about some of the external drivers. We've talked a little bit about the internal mechanisms of cooperatives. In order for the sector of worker cooperatives to be healthy, you need these 4 elements. When you look at the ESOP sector, these 4 elements are quite strong and have been facilitated through years of effort and work. A friendly legal and regulatory environment, a robust business support system, flexible financing, and lastly, a competitive, locally rooted businesses. These are all components that will help grow this sector from niche small businesses that that serve particular interests or needs in the community to a more robust system. So one thing to mention here is that over the last 20 years, we've seen a considerable amount of work happening in the co-op field that is centering these core elements, and increasingly advanced field of lenders, fund managers, co-op developers, and business advisors who are collaborating at multiple levels to ensure that the growth of this sector is strategic and well supported. So I'd say we're growing, this sector is growing up to be quite advanced in the way that we're being seen by folks that are unfamiliar with the cooperative structure. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about municipal support and why this growth is actually happening. While local governments have traditionally invested in entrepreneurship and workforce development as key ways to improve economic conditions, many cities are beginning to explore a combined approach that builds a pathway for ownership. They want to anchor local businesses for the benefit of those usually excluded from ownership opportunities. So there's this real equity model that is coming out of how people are seeing this structure be employed in their cities. So, and we think cities play a vital role in improving standards for workers and providing stable, dignified employment, right? They remove, oftentimes are the ones that are removing barriers for working people to build wealth, and they're stabilizing rapidly changing neighborhoods by rooting these critical goods and services in local communities. So I'm going to go into a couple examples and some of the reasons. So these cities like Boston, Miami, and LA are rapidly changing cities. They're concerned about the loss of larger legacy businesses, established businesses that may accelerate commercial turnover. A high percentage of these businesses are owned by retiring age owners, and the threat of selling it to a third party or the possible closure of these businesses are increasing. And so cities are paying attention to these types of what we're calling legacy businesses as a strategy to retain some of these larger, what they're calling anchor or legacy businesses in their community. So for example, the city of Boston has integrated employee ownership technical assistance into their Office of Economic Development. And they did this in partnership with several of the worker co-op networks. Excuse me. they did this in combination with the worker co-op networks and a lot of the lenders in the Boston area. The city of Miami, for instance, is also supporting local business and technical assistance organizations just to begin raising awareness about the structure and the model, and to let owners know that this might be a way to either exit the business or think about growth and buy-in from the employees. So employee ownership transactions are sort of being employed in these cities as a way to mitigate and stabilize rapidly gentrifying or rapidly changing neighborhoods. Going into the next slide, with Cleveland, Durham, and Madison, they've all really thought about cooperatives as a way to address the racial wealth gap. In particular, in these cities, African-American and Latino households hold lower levels of business and financial assets. And Cleveland, for example, has used strong relationships with the anchor institutions like hospitals and universities to generate procurement contracts with larger cooperatives. So they've created a pipeline of customers for these cooperatives. In Durham, they're new to this work, but they're starting to think about preserving Black legacy businesses as Durham has its tech triangle there, and they're starting to see this growth and boom and sort of innovation and technology. They also want to really recognize and preserve the legacy of Black history in their city through employee ownership. Lastly, Madison has had several years of funding, a multi-year worker co-op development program, and they've done this again through partnerships with the university there in Madison. So the lack of secure and equitable work is the last sort of reason that cities are really looking to this structure. Barriers to employment are real. A lot of people turning to gig work where wages are low and standards are low. Worker cooperatives are a way to think about how people can start up a business. So New York and in Minneapolis, they funded several years of actually in New York, excuse me, in New York in particular, they are in their 6th year of funding. And in particular, this funding is to start new worker cooperatives in low-income and immigrant workforces. In Philadelphia, for example, they've been working with their commercial corridor managers. These are your foot soldiers that are knocking on the Main Street businesses and talking to owners about employee ownership as a way to think about exit strategies and or growth strategies for those businesses. So the city plays an important role in informing the public while at the same time removing barriers. So when we think about the municipal support and this growth, for me, in this context, I'm curious to know how municipal support might actually help improve labor standards, might advance some of the agendas that you all are trying to work on. Are there partners and people that you all are tied to in any of these cities that could really advance the work you're already doing? We believe that cities play a vital role in providing stable, dignified employment. They remove barriers for working people to build wealth, and they stabilize rapidly changing neighborhoods. And the labor sector professionals like you play a vital role in partnering and educating and equipping policymakers and cities to really invest in strategies like this. So I challenge you to consider how this work can help advance your work, and I hope that we can all stay in touch and grow this sector together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chev. This could be like a 90 minutes by itself. So, Daniel, I think you're, yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing if you're ready. And Dan will tell us about a specific example of a $70 million worker co-op.
80.
80, depends who you talk to.
No, I just saw the finances. Can you see my screen?
No.
No, okay. What am I supposed to do?
There we go.
There we go. All right. So I'm Dan Fireside. I've been the capital coordinator at Equal Exchange for over a decade. So title here is Raising Capital Without Losing Control, which Equal Exchange is known as a fair trade pioneer in coffee, tea, chocolate, other fair trade food and beverages. But the part that I'm going to be talking about is how we've really innovated the ability to raise capital for worker co-ops without and other mission-driven companies without losing the control that is so essential to those businesses. There we go. So I like to think about a lot how the rules of the game shape the outcome, especially when it comes to business and how they're funded. Think of, monopoly, which is sort of the main set of rules that we all have to follow, and the outcome is kind of predetermined. There's only one winner, everyone else is a loser. There are other ways to organize businesses, even within our existing structure. A system where everyone wins or loses, where we all depend on each other, and everyone else's success is how we measure the success of the business itself. A conventional corporate pyramid, power is exercised downward, and money and especially profits flow upward to a smaller number of folks, generally, private owners or outside investors. The Equal Exchange model, there's been a slight update to this, but we'll go with this one. It doesn't look anything like that. We have lots of circles and lines, but the large one here is the co-op members. You've worked there for a year, you get elected into the co-op by a single share of our common stock. And that gives you the right to vote on a number of important things in the company, like our bylaws, articles of organization. We also elect almost all the members of the board of directors. A majority of the seats are held by the workers. The board, does normal board things, approving budgets, stock offerings, legal liability, but essentially they're also overseeing the company management via the president. We, until recently, had 2 co-directors. Now we have 1 single director, executive director with 4 vice presidents. But the idea here is they're running day-to-day management. So we don't vote on everything. We vote on if we're ever going to move the company headquarters, if we're going to change the nature of the business, a number of really big things. And we do share profits. But it's definitely not. But one thing you will notice is not here are outside investors. So while a conventional company, is designed as we're told for profit maximization for those outside investors, Equal Exchange was, and I think most worker co-ops are designed around a different set of assumptions. Basically, that everyone who engages with our business, whether you work there or not, should come away better off. Whether you're selling to us, buying from us, working for us directly, investing, or we're part of your community. And that kind of ethos just creates a different set of incentives. The company itself is really designed to make connections between the producers of our food. This was a farmer, Santos, who I stayed with his house, coffee farmer in northern Peru, and coffee drinkers around the world, well, mostly in the US for us, who normally don't have any kind of connection or understanding of where their food comes from. And our business is designed to really change those terms of trade to really rebalance it in favor of the farmers who do most of the work but get the least amount from your coffee dollar, and also to engage consumers and make them more aware of where their coffee is coming from and how they're part of the global food system. So it's great to be a part of a mission-driven company. I'm connected to a lot of them in one way or another, but as we've seen, this is Michigan University, Phil Howard, you might have seen a version of this chart. This is one of his ones showing the consolidation in the organic industry, that the problem isn't just getting your business successful, it's actually success itself, because of the system of venture capitalism and profit maximization. Once you're successful, you're almost forced by design to sell out to a large conglomerate that is part of the problem that you were trying to solve. So how does equal change do it? Well, we do a lot of things, but the way that we stay independent, I think, isn't just because we're pure of heart or soul and everyone else who has sold out over the years, but it's from our capital model, I would posit. Now, we are a conventional business. We still need outside funding in order to grow. If we were just, although the workers make a financial contribution that is very meaningful to them individually and is at risk if the company fails, it's not really enough to finance a worker cooperative beyond just a small shop, and that's how we stay sort of niche and an interesting, asterisk. In order to grow, we need larger sources of capital than the workers could contribute, and we get that, like many companies, from a mix of investors and debt. I also put retained earnings here because that's basically all of the profits that the company has made that all of the previous co-op members decided to leave in the company. We decided to leave on the table for future generations. And so there's that forward and backward thinking. We have to think about those that come after us and honor the work and sacrifice of those who came before us. But our investment in debt is very different. So I want to talk about the investment. That's, I think, we have a lot of cool alternative loans from very sympathetic lenders, but our real innovation was how to get outside investment without trading it for power and control, which is very antithetical to the worker co-op model. So we use something that's been out there, Class B, pardon my spelling mistakes, preferred shares. There's a fixed price, so there's no capital gains. We don't do quarterly valuations. Modest dividend. It's between 0 and 8%. It's capped at 0 with a target of 5, but it's a soft target, not guaranteed. You have to hold it for a minimum of 5 years, which gives a nice long-term framework. I like to note that a coffee seedling takes about 5 years before it's in full bloom and can last for 20 or 30 years if you take care of it. And most importantly, no voting rights. Outside investors do not control the company. So it's great to have an alternative, thing that tilts the balance back in favor of the workers of the company, but does it work? So sales, here's a nice little sales chart of you can see our sales growth. It definitely took us, about a dozen years before we became an overnight success. We were probably more successful in challenging the status quo of the coffee world, the specialty coffee world, than we were in moving the product. But then we figured out what we were doing and added other things like chocolate and bananas and avocados, and things have gone pretty well. Our stock, we've actually sold quite a bit of it. Again, people didn't know if we were, what to make of us. Were we a nonprofit, a conventional for-profit company? I think things really took off, besides, my showing up around here in 2010, was really the last financial crisis. I guess we can say that now. where the conventional stock model really showed its great weakness. And suddenly people said, wow, you guys didn't lose any of my money and you kept making it. And beyond that, I feel really good about it. Even if you had lost money, I know you would have been doing the right thing. And but you've actually keep making money and hitting out solid returns. And we actually have access to all the capital we need. And I spend a lot of my time turning it away. We have a long history of paying dividends.
We have to transition soon, Dan, so just.
Okay, I'm almost done. Long history of paying dividends. It's modest. We do, outside folks don't get a vote, but they are counted as important stakeholders. And we actually put part of our patronage or profit sharing into a fund that invests into the preferred stock. So we're affected if the rate goes up or down. And we also, unlike most companies that are maximizing profits, we put limits on profit. We have a pretty tight pay ratio, a little under 3.5 to 1, highest to lowest, not highest to average. Equal profit sharing. Everyone in the company, no matter what your job is, once you're a full-on co-op member, gets the same exact profit sharing. Modest dividends, like I said, and our no sellout clause, where we actually have included in our corporate bylaws and operating rules that if we were to ever sell the company, we return any money at face value back to investors. All the remaining net assets have to be donated to another alternative trading organization. I'll end it there.
Great. Thank you, Dan. So if you go ahead and stop sharing your screen, please. And then I think Steve is up next, and you're not going to share a screen, right? There's no slides, visual.
No, there's no slides. I'm PowerPoint free is my motto. So two great presentations though by both Shev and Dan is sort of teeing up a lively conversation about capital structures and how workers can benefit from new forms of ownership. Just by way of background, I was working as a machinist in 1980, setting up a printing press in Santiago, Chile, and went to a bookstore and picked up a book called The North Will Rise Again by Randy Barber. And Randy's theory back in that book came out in 1978 was that union pension funds would end up socializing America. That if union pension funds got organized, they could actually buy every single company in the United States. It was a fascinating idea, and working in Pinochet-controlled Chile, I found that a great idea. And as an activist in the Machinist Union, and then a recipient of a scholarship, and actually that's it right there in my background. Got a BA, MA, PhD. Ended up working for Mario Cuomo in the New York Center for Employee Ownership in 1987, 1988, where Governor Cuomo, the first, was very actively engaged in these issues of how to anchor jobs in New York State, and really it was a model that could work anywhere, but the economic development model was how do you keep manufacturing jobs, how do you keep businesses going in New York State, and employee ownership was seen as a positive model for doing that. So I did that for a couple of years and then went back to work at the Machinist as the director of strategy. And during my time there, I was involved in multiple negotiations with companies that were restructuring for whatever reason, for mostly in difficult concessionary times, but not exclusively. And in many of those situations, we were able to exchange through bargaining. We were able to gain some ownership and control of the businesses. So the United Airlines ESOP in 1994, the Northwest Airlines ESOP in 1993. These were examples of employee ownership models that worked for a time in changing the structure of the companies and empowering workers and unions to have a seat at the table. Fast forward to the present, or just before the present, I actually ran the Machinist Union's pension fund. So we were an asset owner. We actually owned and controlled $12 billion in the pension fund that we allocated to investment managers. Now, this is where things get a little tricky, is that as a fiduciary for pension assets, you have to make your investment decisions based on what's in the best interest of the participants and the beneficiaries. And that sort of excluded, unfortunately, many classes of investments. Though, Daniel, when I saw the returns that you have gotten and been able to generate, I wish we had invested in you guys. That looks like a pretty solid investment. So this whole area of how to sort of harness capital and how to put capital to work in a way that is good for workers that's what I just want to talk about a little more specifically. You know, this is the role of unions in an employee-owned company, whether it's a 10% ownership or profit sharing or fully a worker cooperative, is an evolving area. And many people say, like, well, what role could a union play in an employee-owned company? If the employees own it, what would the union do? Well, actually, they do a very important role, because even in all of those companies I cited, and many of the others that I've worked with, including with a really great group of people in Ohio, in Dayton and Cincinnati, in a couple of initiatives called Co-op Cincy and Co-op Dayton. They are running worker-owned co-ops that are also unionized, and in finding a way that collective bargaining actually adds to the durability and the sustainability of the businesses. And so that's a model that I think is worth further exploration, and really important for unions to sort of take up the cause as Chev really laid out. These anchoring of these businesses are good for communities, good for workers, and unions can play a positive role in thinking about how to run these businesses in a way that is long-term profitable. Samuel Gompers, one of the founders of the American labor movement, said the worst crime against working people is a company that fails to operate at a profit. Now think about that. And so sort of my pitch is for unions to think about co-ops in a positive way. Think about ways that employee ownership and capital structures can add value to their members and anchor the businesses and help them to grow in the long term. There are many aspects of capital markets. The part of my life that I'm not going to talk about too much here, unless Bob Charavelli asks me to, is on the private equity side. So I actually work as a consultant to private equity firms who are looking to buy unionized companies. And there we find ways to actually align the interest of investors and the unions and the workers in a positive way, sometimes involving shared ownership and profit sharing models. And so there's another whole aspect of our capital markets that we should be exploring, and that I'm happy to talk about. And I had promised Jessie that I would cede back my extra couple of minutes, and there I am doing that. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Steve. Although there's already a lot of questions, but I'm like, private companies who want to buy union companies, I'm very curious about that. But let's go to Natalie first, and she's going to speak directly even to one of the questions that was already in there. Share my screen. Here we go. There was Steve, and now there. How's that?
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm worked with Organically Grown Company for 15 years. I was on our board of directors for 9 years, and I led a project to restructure the company. out of an ESOP. And full disclosure, I was actually the ESOP plan administrator at the time as well. So I knew a lot about kind of the ins and outs of how the ESOP was working and not working for our employees. So organically grown, let's go to the first slide here. Thanks. It has existed for 40 years. We're one of the largest distributors of organic fruits and vegetables. So that means we have lots of trucks on the road and big warehouses. So most of our workforce is involved in the actual moving of the product every day, as well as the selling and buying of it. So first, why were we founded? We were founded by a group of activists who were concerned that the way people were farming and eating was unhealthy for the planet and unhealthy for people, and they wanted to see change. So we were first formed actually as a nonprofit to promote research, education, to help folks transition to organic agriculture. Quickly realized that the best way to get more folks to transition to organic agriculture was to help the farmers make a living growing the food differently. So formed a producer co-op. As Shevanthi mentioned, the farmers owned 100% of the cooperative. That allowed them to coordinate production and grow the business. Over time, we realized that farmers weren't the only folks who were bringing value to the company and helping grow the company, that workers were a big part of growing the value in the company. So, and we added on, we actually transitioned from a cooperative to an S corporation in the 90s. So farmers got shares based on the volume that they had been selling through the cooperative, and then staff also bought in with shares. Over time, grew and grew, and realized that the S Corp had a limit of 100 owners. We had close to 300 employees, so we wanted to find a way to bring all of our employees into ownership, so it wasn't the haves and have-nots. So we added on an employee stock ownership plan. And when I was the plan administrator, I started to see some clouds on the horizon with that structure. One is giving employees long-term retirement stock as compensation is not necessarily what everyone wanted, and it can actually limit your ability to give employees other forms of compensation, like increases in compensation, benefits, profit sharing, because you're using a lot of your resources to buy back stock from founders and give it to employees. And this cycle of buying back stock from founders, you have to value your stock at fair market valuation, which can compare your company to the public market and similar companies who might be actually profit maximizers. So their valuation is based off of that, even if your company doesn't operate in a profit maximizing way, because maybe it spends more on operational expenses like good wages and benefits programs. So you get into the cycle of having to buy back your stock at whatever the market rate is. Also, in our ESOP on the governance side, we did pass-through voting. So our employees voted directly for the board and could serve on the board. And one of the things we discovered was a challenge is that there's actually a fiduciary responsibility of ESOP trustees to entertain offers to sell the company if someone comes and offers you a good price. So that could mean the trustees sell the company today to maximize the retirement plan benefits for your current employees at the expense of future workers and potentially the future missional operations of the company. So we wanted to avoid that scenario. So what we came up with was to buy back the stock of the company and put it in a stewardship ownership model. And I'll talk about what stewardship ownership is, but it's basically a very different way to think about holding ownership, to think about and actually do holding of the ownership of a company. So let's talk about that. So why this new structure? So one of the things we realized in our discovery process is that we really view our business as being a vehicle for change. We don't view it as a vehicle to maximize profit and share value for owners. We want to do our work every day of moving produce so that we can help the farmers make a living growing differently, so that we can provide a living to the people moving the food, and that we can offer our customers access to good organic products. The problem is most corporate structures have embedded into their DNA the shareholder primacy model. And in that model, businesses exist to generate private wealth on behalf of owners and shareholders. And that leads to some of these results on the right. So it's not that people are bad people. There's a structural problem where the fiduciary responsibilities, the legal and governance, and the financing terms are structured in most corporations around this shareholder primacy model. And next, click here. My argument is that these conventional profit maximizing models are actually leading to a crisis for people and the planet. So an example is, I'm an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. I want to transform food and agriculture through a fair trade company, but I have to go to investors to gain some capital to grow my business. Now I've signed up maybe for a private equity or venture fund that has a 3 to 5 year payback horizon, and they want me to, quadruple the value of my company and then sell it. So I can actually be forced to push prices down lower for the producers, for the workers, in order to gain those returns. So those are the tools that are available to folks that might actually force behavior in a way that maximizes share value to the expense of other stakeholders. So my argument is that we need a new paradigm, and stewardship ownership can be one solution. So stewardship ownership is basically a different way to think about ownership in a company. It shifts the structures, goals, and incentives in a company. So rather than viewing a corporation existing for the purpose of maximizing share value for shareholders, it views the corporation as producing a product and service that is of value to society, that it does through commerce, but that the equity is actually held for that ongoing purpose, not in private hands. And that purpose is best stewarded by people who are creating the value and benefiting from the value. And also those people who are creating the value and benefiting from the value should share in the economic returns that are produced by the company. So these two principles, the first is profits are mainly reinvested back into the purpose. So it's not a nonprofit, it's a for-profit company that's selling products and services, but the profits are reinvested back into expanding that mission and sharing with the stakeholders who are creating the value. Second is that the control should be held by stewards who can keep the company on track to delivering value to that purpose. That might be employees, that might also include even customers who access those products and services, folks in the supply chain who can talk about and hold the company accountable to whether it's fulfilling that purpose. Next slide. So again, kind of a contrast, we can go ahead and click through these. In shifting the way the corporation is structured, we're moving away from conventional ownership models towards stewardship models. These are some of the differences. Next slide. So I'll talk about the nuts and bolts of our structure in contrast to traditional structure. So in a traditional structure, shareholders own and control the company to their benefit. They may choose, so they have both economic rights and governance rights. And they may choose to give some rights to other stakeholders, but that's optional. Next slide. In the stewardship ownership model, and I'm using OGC in this case, we have a new owner, which is a purpose. So we've actually set up a trust whose only beneficiary is to hold the company assets for an ongoing purpose. And in this case, the trust owns the company, and the company is supposed to take the earnings that it has and reinvest them back into the company and the stakeholders. Let's click forward. So since the trust owns the company, independence is permanently secured, because in the trust agreement, the trust is never going to sell the company and never going to extract a profit from the company. So we literally have a benevolent owner who will never die, never wants to extract a profit, directs the board of directors to steward the company to the ongoing purpose. Governance is held in the hands of merit-based stewards. So it's no longer sold or inherited. It's actually passed by the stakeholders to merit-based stewards for best the purpose for which the company operates, which in our case is to distribute organic fruits and vegetables and treat our supply chain well. Profits, the company is still profitable, it reinvests in itself and shares with the company. The other beauty of this model is it can allow for a capitalization of the company from the outside, just like in the equal exchange model. We've offered non-voting preferred shares. The community, investors can invest in those, and they share in a portion of the income generated on balance with reinvesting in the company and sharing with the other stakeholders, but they don't have the rights to sell the company as their private property, as their, or control the steering wheel of the company. Next slide. So if you're interested in learning more about these stewardship models as a new way to think about kind of the purpose of the corporation, why it exists, and how that purpose is stewarded and who the rewards get shared with, there's actually some great research coming out of Europe. These models are actually, there's historic examples in Europe of trust ownership models. And there's also some emerging examples in the United States, including something called a golden share. And we also have alternative ownership advisors that we've started based on our experience with our model, where we're trying to share with other social enterprises, mission-driven entrepreneurs about how to structure their companies in this way. So we have some updates on our website.
Thank you, Natalie. And there have been, there are several questions in the chat. I think we're probably going to have time for about 2 or 3. So I was wondering, actually, Natalie, if you could just segue from this to the question of using New Belgium as a specific example, and basically how did being an ESOP influence their sellout to not being an ESOP?
Yeah, well, ESOPs can be challenged in that you're using your own profitability to buy back stock from your founders to give them to employees, to give that stock to employees. And then when employees leave the company, you're also using profitability to pay those folks out. And so you're on this kind of what we call the stock buyback treadmill. And if you're in an industry or a sector that's highly valued and your company is growing, you can almost become a victim of your own success, where your valuation is going up and up and up. So you're having to take more and more of your resources to buy back stock versus potentially make other investments in your company. That combined with, if you're in a hot market, the trustees are actually fiduciarily bound to maximize the value of the retirement plan assets for your employees. So in some cases, the trustees will entertain offers to sell the company. And if the offer is good, they will sell the company, which will benefit the current employees, but potentially, it's taking the company out of employee ownership for the long term. So that's one of the reasons why we like these stewardship models, is in stewardship models, kind of like the equal exchange example, independence is locked in that the company is no longer for sale. Nobody can go to our trust and offer to buy the company because the trust has mandated that it's supposed to hold the company into perpetuity for the purpose and not to maximize value for any shareholder. So you actually remove that fiduciary incentive to sell the company, especially if it's doing well, to an outside party. It's literally held in trust for the ongoing purpose.
And even Equal Exchange could vote to change the bylaw that is our never sell out clause. So Dan and I need to follow up on how to get that permanency of a trust in there.
Well, we did add it to our articles of organization, which
are harder to change.
Much harder to change.
Yeah, and I'll say our model is multi-stakeholder and rooted in this purpose of transforming food and agriculture. But there are new stewardship ownership models emerging, which are focused on a purpose trust where the only beneficiary ongoing is employees. So they call them EOTs, employee ownership trust. But basically, still purpose trust, the underlying company cannot be sold. And after the profits are reinvested to keep the company healthy, 100% of the rest of it goes to employees. And there's examples of a farm worker cooperative or a farm worker purpose trust that is going now in California, a home care healthcare workers purpose trust in Washington. So this is another kind of variation of worker-based stewardship ownership that's emerging.
Cool. And then the other question that I think is probably a applies to many of you is this question around basically how does a the person used, the attendee used the term a non-ESOP company transition to an ESOP. So say, how does a private company transition to a worker cooperative, or how you keep it at worker co-op, because to say how it would transition to a purpose trust is more time than we have. But Shev, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. That's a great question. So either converting to a worker-owned cooperative or an ESOP structure is determined based on probably the size and the revenue size of the company. So when we see companies that are 50 employees or more making revenue of 10 million or more, let's say, as a threshold, generally speaking, we think that ESOPs are a good structure for them to look into because they can benefit from the tax breaks. However, to administer an ESOP is costly. And so if you're a smaller firm making less in revenue, we generally think that a cooperative might be the right structure. And in both cases, there are technical assistance providers around the country that specifically help with this work. But the initial stages are really for a advisor to sit down with the single owner or owners to have a conversation about their goals on their exit strategy, particularly understand what gaps these owners might leave. So if it's a single owner or multiple owners, they have special skills and or relationships that are keeping the business afloat. And so in order to transition that business to employee owned, you need to assess what gaps might be left as those owners exit. And then determining those gaps and then doing an evaluation on the company's financials. That's sort of the first stage. By that point, if the company is feasible and viable in order to move through the transaction, then you go into a third party evaluation. And in that stage is where you're really sort of negotiating the price point for the company. And then we always encourage any advisor that's working with a company, oftentimes it could be transitioned in 6 months, let's say, which might be a shorter period of time, but the longer period of time is really the employee engagement, education, how to become an owner. That component we think could last anywhere from a year to 2 years or longer. Building the culture within the institution on how to participate in a democratically owned company is a vital component of getting the workforce really involved and feeling like owners and acting like owners. So there are several organizations around the country that help specifically provide democratic participatory education to owners. DOWI is one, the Federation is another, and then there's several other TA providers as well that do that.
And I'll just add in, the process to move to a stewardship ownership model is not that different. We work with owners. We're basically buying back their stock to settle it into a purpose trust. So the common stock will be held for a purpose into the future. So we have to define what that purpose is. And if the company is no longer held by outside stockholders, you also need to decide, as the company is profitable over time, where does the money go? So you have to decide who makes the decisions and where does the money go once you settle the company into a trust for an ongoing purpose. And to finance out the existing owners, you can do that through a combination of debt, donation, as well as you can issue a non-voting preferred stock to help aid in the leveraging of the buyout.
Yeah, actually that reminds me that, so I was in advising a training program to be an advisor that was part of DOWI called the Democracy at Work Network, because it was all peer advisors. And one of the documents that we would use with groups sometimes was called 23 questions to answer before you talk to a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that probably those questions are very similar whether you're converting to a worker co-op or converting to a purpose trust, because a lot of them are about like all the layman's terms of like, well, who's going to make what decisions and how, and you have to talk that all through before you can tell the lawyer how to draw up the bylaws.
I would just sort of say, like, talk to any one of us if you're interested, because I think all of us in part of our work is we're so convinced of the value of this model that we want everyone else to be following it. So
Yes, and
we're
shout
very
out to
happy
Dan. Dan advised us on our recapitalization, and was a key part of our success in making our transition. So it gets passed down.
Yeah, and over. One question I have, I don't know if the Lyra folks are still on here, but will folks also be able to put questions on our discussion thread on the website? So if they think of something later, they could email individually, but if they want it to kind of go to everyone, I don't know if that's or maybe they don't know yet because they've never had a virtual conference before. Because we are at time. We have a few minutes. These are the contact, you all can still see now everyone's email address, right? On the screen, okay. And like Dan said, like basically we all want more worker ownership or, purpose stewardship. So any questions that you have, one question maybe that I would ask to the panelists before we leave are, are there, based on this conference even, who's in the audience, like are there research topics or industry connections that you feel like you could actually advance your work, that you want to kind of plant a seed for anyone who's listening or listens to the recording?
Yeah, I think in the worker co-op sector in particular, the impacts on worker owners over time, that's something that Rutgers University and the U.S. Federation have been working on, but there could be a lot more research in the space around the impacts on workers and wealth building in particular. We don't see enough of that research coming out from different institutions, so that would be really helpful.
Jess, some additional ideas that have been thrown up here on the legal aspects of this. So in the labor law, there's something called 882, which keeps labor and management from being too cozy. Now, in a worker-owned enterprise, those boundaries get blurred. So the whole aspect of labor law and fiduciary standards under ERISA as well. There are lots of legal questions to get clarity on going forward. I think it would be a good thread to sort of keep up on.
And
one area I see a lot of promise, and I'm part of a work group exploring this right now, is right now there's a lot of tax incentives for ESOPs, but there aren't necessarily tax incentives for other alternative ownership structures that share prosperity and decision-making more broadly. For example, our model is multi-stakeholder, right? We believe that all of these various stakeholders are part of our success. And so what are specific things that we could get through? And I think actually post-COVID, there's a lot of bills moving forward that could look at, how we're buying back troubled companies and putting them, or there's government financing. Maybe as part of that, we could say these companies eventually have to transition back to some sort of stewardship or worker model. These are the things that we need, and also some of the tax incentives for owners at this stage to transition their companies into these models. So that's an area, if anybody wants to talk more about, we have a small work group going on kind of federal and state level incentives for succession planning into these models. So yeah, that's what I would encourage.
Thank you. So at that, we will wrap up, and thank you so much for participating and for attending. We will maybe see you next year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.